Welcome to the History Hotline, a direct line to a better understanding of all things Black history and beyond. Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the History Hotline. My name is Deanna Lincook and as always I'll be your host today. So much has happened since I was last recording. So firstly, my apologies for the gap in episodes, and second of all, it means that there's a whole lot of stuff to catch up on in today's episode, and a catch up is what today will be. We are on the way to a general election, following Rishi Sunak's soggy speech, reminding us all just how awful it has been living, working and breathing in the UK since the Tories got elected, and even more so dire in the last 5 years or so, I would say. I am thinking about election episodes or some kind of episode that thinks about voting, but I'm personally so torn with what I might myself do by way of a vote. Thinking of actually putting a tick or a cross, I don't even know, in a box, spoiling the ballot, because I just feel so apathetic towards politics, political parties, politicians generally. But what I will say for now is that you should register to vote. Register for acceptable forms of voting ID. If you don't have that already, double check if you need to. Because at the end of the day, then you have the best range of options and choices. So if you do decide at the last minute that you do want to vote instead of not, you have the option. It's best to have the options and then decide you're not going to use them, or then not having the options because you made a choice to not register or not get the voting ID that you need. And you do need voting ID now for the last few local elections and things like that you have. So if you voted in those, you will know if you already have the ID you need. Otherwise, double check. Also registering for a postal vote if you know you're going to be out the country or not able to get to a polling station on the 4th of July. You can also register for a vote in proxy. So there are options available, and I think just figuring out in good time, it's the end of May, perfect time. The last day to register to vote is June 18th. The last day to apply for a postal vote is June 19th. And the last day to apply for a voter ID certificate and a proxy vote would be on the 26th of June. That is if you're voting in person. So make sure you've got all of those things done. And if you need any more advice on that, then I think gov.uk is probably the best website for you. I wasn't actually sponsored to say any of that, but I do think voting, democracy and just being politically engaged is very important, especially in the current world we're living in. I'm not going to say any more about elections personally. Maybe if there's a demand for an episode, maybe I'll piece something together, but I really highly doubt it. A lot's going on by way of other things, and I think that's probably exactly why there's an election being called so soon, because there's so much else going on that our focus is on. I've actually really missed recording and being here in my little small room with my microphone and laptop set up, as I have been doing for the past nearly 4 years now. But I have some good news, exciting news, more exciting than an election. We're having a live show! The first ever History Hotline live show is coming to St James Place, King's Cross, London, as part of the London Podcast Festival on Sunday the 15th of September at 2 p.m. So plenty of time to get yourself a ticket and make your way down there. I'm so excited to be given the opportunity to have been asked to be a part of this live show, to be part of the festival. And I am working very diligently to put together a very special show. I would absolutely love and adore to meet some of you listeners there, and hope to see as many of you as possible that have been supporting the show, either, from this episode as your first, or as early as episode 1 on the Mangrove 9, which came out in August 2020. I am so looking forward to it, and hopefully I can bring you some nice surprises for the show. But please do make sure you get your tickets in good time. I am really hoping also to say that the first live show was sold out. So that's kind of something on the wish list for this show. So please, ticket link will be on my social media. It will also be in the show notes for this episode. If you want a ticket, or if you want any more information about the festival, look at London Podcast Festival. They have so many cool podcasters. So if you want to come down for the festival and catch a few shows, they're running over the 2 first weekends of September. So I will be in the second weekend on the 15th. But from the Friday, the Saturday, Sunday of that weekend, there'll be shows either side of me in the day and also on the days before. So if you wanted to come down and catch several shows, the option is there for you. It's looking like it will be a really cool festival. Now, I might be thinking, where have I been? Where have the episode's been? I've been missing. I was in the United States of America. I was fortunate enough to present my work at Northwestern University as part of a doctoral exchange that my university, Queen Mary, have with them. And it was really cool for me to be out there and share work with folks that also work on the Caribbean and Britain across the same decades and earlier decades than I do. Also, linking kind of their methodologies with my own research and being able to share like my PhD work was really, really cool. One thing about doing a podcast is over the 4 years I've now kind of built up a real big bank of knowledge when it comes to Black Britain and Caribbean history. I don't know a lot, and I don't know very super PhD level in-depth analysis on any one topic bar my own PhD. But it was quite nice to even just have a little kind of introductory knowledge from the podcast to be able to engage with other people's work and research and just hear more about it and, learn more about what other people are doing and the way that they are framing these histories over there in the States. The opportunity to be out there, to use the archives there was really cool. My trip also took me to New York. It was to use the Columbia archives for my PhD research and for a podcast series on another platform that I'm working on. And as I left, I did the last episode, which was started off with thinking about the encampments and the student protests, and I got into thinking about the Black People's Day of Action in 1981, and I kind of knew at that point that I probably wouldn't be able to do the archival work at Columbia because of the university and the way that they were handling the encampment. And by the way, by way of handling, I mean them sending in NYPD and having snipers on the roof. And completely, I would say, overreacting to student protests and students using their right to protest and their right to be heard in a genocide. I found it very interesting that the kind of way that Columbia reacted and the kind of, I guess, domino effect that had on other encampments in the US and now more so in the UK, and the way that people were responding to the students, and also the way that the universities were, considering they are supposed to be places, of learning, of sharing your opinions, of speaking out against things, of you have the time as a student to be able to do the reading and do the work and stand up, as they have done historically, against things like US involvement in Vietnam and the Vietnam War, standing up against things like apartheid in South Africa, all things that we accept today as being on the quote-unquote right side of history, those protests and those marches. And at the time, those people were being portrayed, those students were being portrayed in a way they are similarly today. It's very interesting to see how, people are portrayed historically and how we think of them then today doing similar things. I do find the whole kind of thing extremely interesting, and by thing, I mean the way that universities are responding to these encampments and protests, because it's the same universities today that deem encampments unlawful and are calling in law enforcement, security, various forms of police, armed responders, snipers that harass students, brutalise them. They're the same universities that brag about the way that their campuses have been hubs of protest historically, standing up for what's right. And it's the same way that they will probably in the future think and talk about these encampments that they were so violently against as them doing the work. And it'll be very interesting to see. But don't forget it. Don't forget the way that people respond to student activism. Don't forget the way they're being portrayed in the media and the press. Because in about, I don't even think 10 years, 5 years, 2 years, next month, the way that the narrative will switch will be extremely interesting. But don't forget. I just think if universities cannot tolerate students' rights to protest, they really should be reconsidering their role as institutions and what they believe they're actually here to do for society and for the students that walk through their doors. I say all this whilst there is an encampment happening right now on my campus, Queen Mary. Full solidarity with all the students that are there standing up and asking for the university to divest funds from Israel and the genocide that's currently occurring. Or for them to be transparent. In some cases, some encampments are asking for their universities to be just transparent about how much university profit is supporting this ongoing genocide in Palestine, whether that is companies that then fund it or through arms and the investment into certain companies and systems that are used to conduct genocidal activity. In the time between me literally writing notes and a script for this episode and recording it, Israel has continued to bomb the region and to bomb Rafah despite the International Court of Justice ruling on Friday, the 24th of May, that ordered Israel to halt its military operation in the southernmost part of Gaza Strip. Now, this also follows the South African case that I haven't forgotten but nearly did, because who would have thought that happened when the situation is even worse than it was back then. Their case was brought against Israel through the ICJ, which still hasn't had a full decision. And whilst it did have some interim recommendations, I personally struggle to understand the purpose of these courts and channels and international law, because at the end of the day, people are still being murdered. Israel bombed Rafah, and there are bodies that have been burnt to ash. There are children that have lost limbs and have been completely, their corpses are unrecognizable because of the way in which Israel has inflicted this level of violence on what was a safe space that they had essentially coaxed people into to say that would be safe. They were bombed in tents. I can't say enough. I'm sure you've seen the images. There are images of beheaded children. There are images of bodies without limbs, corpses, human beings screaming, children screaming as they are set on fire in tents. That's not even to mention the levels of malnutrition. I was listening to a report from a doctor from a medical charity that was working there that was talking about the fact that the injuries that a lot of people have there would actually, in some cases, be quite easy to treat and to recover from, obviously with the right medical aid, which they don't have for the most part. But he said more kind of perversely is the fact that they're malnourished, so their bodies can't even fight the kind of easier things to get over. Their bodies have so little energy from basic food and drink that the more simple injuries and issues that they're dealing with, they can't even deal with those, let alone then the really serious issues that they don't have enough medical supplies to deal with. It's a horrific situation. I don't really have the words for it, and I'm even struggling to kind of think through what I'm supposed to say about this. But one thing I will say is I just absolutely detest the fact that the response to protests and students protesting, especially in the US, and if you watched, I don't know, I went to some of the encampments, I walked past them, I went through them, and the way that the media was portraying them compared to what they were actually like was insane. The sensationalization of US media and British media at this point as well, because they're taking the news from them anyway, was just crazy to me. I was like, these are peaceful students that are just, taking up space. That's pretty much what they were doing, to hold space as a physical presence and reminder of what was going on and what is going on in Palestine. And it was so crazy to me the way that the media was portraying it. It's also crazy to me that seems to be more backlash for students in the UK, in the US, in other European and North American campuses than there are for the people that are murdering children. And that, to me, is insane. What's also insane is at a time where none of these international courts, these giant bodies, these ICJs can enforce and actually stop the bombing, stop the genocide, stop the children being murdered, stop the abhorrent crimes that are happening. I just don't get what their purpose is. Why are they even funded? Like, what are they actually doing? I don't know. Call me stupid, call me naive. I don't know. What can then be done if they're not listening to these huge bodies like the ICJ? I don't really get it. How also can students be written off as ill-informed, naive, acting out, which is all things I've seen within the media, when they're watching, as we all are, this horrific, abhorrent killing of a whole nation over time? How can the students be the issue? How can Maria Hussein and her coconut placard be an issue and a chargeable offence in court? Maria being a pregnant woman, hounded, harassed by the press, by the police, her children, or child, forgive me, having to take days off school, be removed from school because of the harassment. It's insane that taxpayer money is being used to pursue a case like that, which in fact is just an opinion. Her having Suella Braverman and Rishi Sunak, their heads as like coconuts under a palm tree. A very culturally specific claim, I'd say, of being called a coconut or calling someone a coconut, a term used commonly in the Black and Asian community, and I'm sure other communities use it or a variation of it, to suggest someone that of the said community that is identifying and aligning themselves with like white supremacist, racist views. It doesn't bring violence on them. It doesn't threaten their lives. It doesn't really comment on anything other than to say that they're aligning themselves with white supremacist views and ideals. She didn't call for violence upon the two politicians on her placard, like Frank Hester did, who said Diane Abbott, and I quote, should be shot. And, she makes him hate all black women. And, he actually incited violence on Diane Abbott. She should be shot. Maria Hussein did nothing similar. But she is clearly the issue. Once again, showing that there simply is just one rule for one group of people in this country and another for everybody else. And I think this is part of the reason why I'm really struggling electorally to think about voting, because nothing makes sense to me. Like, nothing makes sense. And I feel like this episode is me just sending my views outside. But I don't understand how any of this makes sense. Of course I do. We're living in a post-colonial world that's not really post-colonial at all. And that's why it all makes sense. But I say all of that to say, and it might go without saying, that action is needed. We can't really, we can, and we kind of have been, sit and watch what's happening in Palestine. Like, it's insane it's gone on this long. And within the quote-unquote October 7th point, but also historically, all the way back. I think we've got to do more. We've got to do as much as we can. I think life is so valuable and precious. Everyone's life is so valuable and precious, and it's terrifying that people's lives are being treated so poorly. Protesting is one way. There have been protests this week, depending when you're listening, Writing to your local MP, as futile as that seems sometimes, another thing you can do. And I know some of them are sending those generic responses back like, we've heard your calls about Palestine and we're doing what we can, or we're not going to do anything, la-di-da-di-da. Keep doing it. Just keep annoying them. Why not? Join the boycotts. Follow the BDS guidelines if you're unsure of what to boycott, who to boycott. The BDS have kind of targeted boycotts, so it makes it a little bit more specific and kind of stops you having to do all the research yourself. If you're at a university or within an institution that has an encampment, support it if you can. Ask them what they need, whether that be things to eat, things to keep them warm. Join them if you can, if that's a possibility for you. There are GoFundMes to get families evacuated out of Gaza, I think to Egypt at first, and then onto places where they have family members, if that's an option. I have seen a few TikTokers that I follow that essentially kind of have families that they're boosting until they reach that donation goal, and then they boost another. Yuval is one. Yuval the Terrible is his @ and then Ayame.p. So that's Yuval the Great and Ayame.p. And they've got this whole like TikTok narrative of like romance that's been going on for ages, and they are leveraging it so well in order to signpost families that need support. This is all vetted, I think, by an organisation called Operation Olive Branch, which verifies the families and shares how you can support them. It also has branches that are looking for help and support with a similar campaign in Sudan and Congo, so stay tuned for more information on that as well. I don't mean to not speak on Congo and Sudan in as much depth because the issues are just as pressing and people are dying, and I've already said human life is sacred regardless of whose it is, and they're faced with horrendous situations due to civil war and violence, and the world is also just watching on. I personally need to do more research, but at this stage I can signpost things, as El Fasher in Sudan is facing genocidal violence too. Both Rafah and El Fasher are currently essentially being burnt to the ground, murdered in so-called safe zones, and the people are being bombed to pieces. So we will continue to share stuff on the History Hotline page, and also my own personal Instagram. But if you wanted to do some work for yourself, there is Sudan.updates on Instagram and @for Sudanese Liberation. And they are posting a lot of information and also signposting what's going on and what you can do to support what's happening in Sudan. In terms of Congo, there is Focus Congo on Instagram and Stand for Congo UK. So that was @Focus Congo and @Stand for Congo UK. For Sudan, it's Sudan.updates and @for Sudanese Liberation. And that's all Instagram pages, by the way. There are also individuals on Twitter and also Instagram that are sharing information too. In regards to Congo, there is a march happening on the 1st of June 2024 if you're listening, in Oxford Circus, London, which you can support and kind of amplify that issue and that crisis. Congo's natural resources power our electronic devices, and this episode wouldn't be with you, this podcast wouldn't be with you without their labour, and it's a real kind of cruel and bitter sweet way to think about things. It's not even sweet, actually. It's not sweet at all. It's very bitter, and it leaves a horrendous taste in my mouth to know that by buying technological products, and whilst ignorance is bliss at the time of purchasing, you may have been indirectly or directly supporting some of the violence that's been meted out to people in Congo. Congo, just like much of Africa, is rich in minerals, which Western companies have been pillaging and raping from the land for centuries. It's leading to ecological issues, the climate crisis for one, but also forced labour, child labour, and the mass abuse of the general population who have to do the work, which is often dangerous work of excavating these natural mineral resources for very low forms of pay, if at all. If they're paid at all. This is also then exacerbated and connected with political violence, which is leading to hundreds of thousands of displaced people in Congo, and also obviously the displaced people in Palestine and Sudan. And all these conflicts are essentially rooted in European imperialism, colonialism and greed. They're all causing ecological crises. They are all contributing to the climate crises. And all of them could be solved very quickly, but instead the world watches on as people die. I personally haven't really ever felt so helpless to the kind of global struggles of colonized people. It's insane to me that there's so much happening, and there are obviously other conflicts, political instability, areas of war and violence over the world that are also needing this violence to end and to stop. And I think the only kind of hope I have is that there is a power in the collective. Putting pressure on those who can make decisions is the only way. And, using this anger, this sadness, this pain, the frustration that you have, and using it to power actions is the only way I think we'll see change. And I know there's probably people that have been listening that have been on the marches, have been supporting, donating as far back as they can remember. And I'm sure it's all very much appreciated by those people who have received that help or have seen their situation improve even in the slightest way. I'm sure they're very grateful, but they need us more. They need us more than just that. If you are sharing on social media, continue, but ask yourself also, what's the point of what you're sharing? Is it to make you look good, to make your page look like you care? Is it to affect change? Is it signposting? Is it educating? Is it allowing people to know more, read more, do more? In the politest way, those AI keep your eyes on Rafah images aren't probably that helpful. And those add your picture to the already millions of the same picture are probably just kind of collecting data and the algorithm's probably just showing who needs to be shadow banned. I don't know too much about tech, but I don't see how that supports or helps. I guess it illuminates the issue, but surely if people don't know by now, they're past helping. And I guess to bring me back to my beginning point, we can vote. We have an election coming up soon. I hope the situation is not the same by the 4th of July. But realistically, I feel like I should have more hope than this, but I really don't. Maybe the situation will have changed, but if it hasn't, then you know what to do in the polls. There has been a party that has been in power in this country for a while, and they have not condemned the actions of Israel at all. That might apply to more than one party. And I think certain things have to be prioritised in this election, and thinking about who gets a tick or a cross. I should probably know that, I feel like they tell you though when you vote. I feel like I haven't voted in ages. That sounds bad. There's been elections. Use the vote wisely. Also, I just thought it interesting in my own reading, because this is a Black history podcast, and I was in America and thinking about African American and Palestinian solidarity, and there was a little page that kind of had a little mini timeline of these moments of solidarity. And as early as the 1940s, African American diplomat and UN mediator Ralph Bunche expressed his hesitation about the creation of the State of Israel due to the anticipated dispossession of the Palestinians. Seems like he just knew. He knew what might happen. In the 50s, Malcolm X was one of the earliest major African-American figures to support the Palestinian cause, and did so. And even before his assassination, he visited the Gaza Strip and Palestinian refugee camps. In 1966, the Black Panther Party vocally and outwardly supported the Palestinian cause because, they were in line with their views on those internally colonized people, African Americans, and also those Palestinians who they defined as third world peoples, also oppressed by colonialism and imperialism. 1970, a group of 56 African American activists published a statement titled "An Appeal by Black Americans Against United States Support for the Zionist Government of Israel." And they also, in kind of line with racism and the racism that they were facing in the US, believed that their struggles were somewhat matched. And this has kind of gone on all the way up to 2014, during the Ferguson uprisings, when Palestine sent advice to protesters via Twitter for resisting tear gas and other military tactics. And I remember this was spoken about in early October, about the kind of the thanks that Ferguson gave to Palestine for that support, and them repaying that by protesting and marching now. So just some historical moments of solidarity, and I guess we can add all those students out protesting today. There's a Black Panther-esque breakfast that was going on at one of the encampments to feed the students that were protesting, and it was beautiful that those traditions were carrying on despite all the ugly in the world. There was still hope. So I close this episode with reminders to vote, to buy tickets for the live show. Maybe we'll continue some of these conversations and have others, and to do what you can for the global situation. Life is just too precious, and too many are losing their lives, and it must stop. It really must. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. Episodes will be coming out every 2 weeks, and hopefully we will be on better regular scheduling from now on. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye.